Chapter 1. The Girl Who Ran Toward the Ocean. Before Catherine Diaz ever understood competition, rankings, sponsorships, or Olympic qualification, she understood mornings. Mornings belonged to the ocean. The Diaz family lived close enough to the coast that the sound of waves entered the house before sunrise. The Pacific along this stretch of El Salvador has a particular quality in the hours before full light, a low rhythmic percussion against volcanic rock that is felt as much as heard, a sound that moves through walls and through sleep and through the first moments of waking consciousness before any rational thought arrives to name it. Some mornings the sound was soft and distant, a gentle suggestion of the water beyond the streets and the dust and the neighbors' roosters. Other mornings it hit the shoreline hard enough to rattle the window frames faintly, while everyone was still asleep, as if the ocean were knocking to remind the house that it was still out there, still moving, still waiting for someone to come meet it. Catherine grew up inside that rhythm the way a person grows up inside a language, not consciously learning it but absorbing it through repetition until it becomes part of how the world is understood. The family. Her father was a man who moved early and quietly. He had the deliberate economy of motion that fishermen and farmers develop when they've spent enough years working before other people wake up, when darkness is not the end of the day but simply a different condition that the day passes through. He was not a surfer himself, but he respected the ocean in the particular way that people who make their living near it respect it, not romantically, not recreationally, but with the specific attention of someone who understands that the thing he's respecting could kill him if he gets complacent. Along the coast of La Libertad, the Pacific fed families and drowned fishermen and occasionally swept away boats that their owners could not afford to replace. Catherine's mother, whose patience with sand tracked into the house was legendary and whose enforcement of homework before surfing was absolute, was the center of gravity around which the household organized itself. She was the one who made sure that the ambitions of 3 older children and eventually a youngest didn't completely consume the ordinary structure of family life. Meals, school, responsibilities, the maintenance of a house where surfboards were always leaning against something and wet towels occupied every available chair. The Diaz children were 4, Giovanni, Erica, Jose, and then Catherine, the youngest. By the time she was old enough to understand what surfing was, her siblings were already competing around El Salvador. Giovanni was the oldest and most serious about competition. Erica surfed with a naturalism that people noticed, a quality of ease in the water that suggested someone born close to it. Jose, almost everyone called him Bamba, was the one who most shaped Catherine's relationship with the ocean, partly because of his talent and partly because of his personality, which was patient and observant and occasionally willing to make things up entirely when pressed for explanations he didn't have. The 6-year-old. At 6 years old, she followed them everywhere, not gracefully. She slipped constantly on wet rocks near the shoreline and hated being left behind when the older kids paddled out. Sometimes she sat on the beach, angry for entire mornings because conditions were considered too dangerous for someone her size. "You're too little," Erica told her once. "I'm not little." "You cried because a crab touched your foot yesterday." "That's different." "You screamed." "It surprised me." Jose laughed so hard he nearly dropped his board. Katie glared at all of them from the sand while hugging her knees dramatically. 5 minutes later, she was chasing hermit crabs again. One morning, with a fresh swell filling in and Katie grounded on the sand again, Bamba crouched beside her before paddling out and pointed down the beach toward the river mouth, where La Bocana was throwing its heavy lips at the sky. "Why do you think nobody's out there on a longboard?" Katie squinted against the glare. "Because that one stands up like a wall and smashes down fast. The one at Sunzal looks like a hill you can slide down." "Exactly. The fast one doesn't give you room to make mistakes. The long one lets you take your time." She stood up, brushing sand off her knees. "I want the fast one." "First you learn to stand up on the hill," Bamba said, and took her hand. Bamba noticed early that his youngest sister paid attention differently than most children around the water. This is worth being precise about, because it's easy to look backward at someone who became extraordinary and see significance in everything from the beginning. That's not what this was. There was no obvious prodigy quality, no moment where observers gasped at a 6-year-old's precocious genius. What Bamba noticed was something quieter and harder to name. It was attention, not talent yet, attention. Some kids wanted the feeling of standing on a board, the sensation, the rush, the physical achievement of not falling immediately. Others liked the identity of surfing, the way it looked in photographs or the way older surfers were treated in town. Katie seemed genuinely interested in the ocean itself. She watched waves with a focus that was almost analytical. She studied where experienced surfers positioned themselves before sets arrived. She noticed how they conserved energy between waves instead of paddling constantly. She paid attention to tide shifts, current lines, wind direction, the sections of reef where waves suddenly changed shape. She was, in a meaningful sense, reading the water rather than just enjoying it. Sometimes she asked exhausting questions. Why did that one close out? Why did he move farther outside before that set? How come the wave broke different that time? Bamba answered most of them patiently. He had grown up in these waves and understood them the way he understood the route home, not theoretically, but through his body, through the accumulated information of thousands of hours in the water. Explaining what he knew instinctively was harder than knowing it, and he sometimes got tired. The ocean is angry today, he told her once, simplifying. That's not real. How do you know? Because yesterday you said the ocean was happy? Bamba shrugged. Maybe it changes moods. Katie narrowed her eyes suspiciously. He would still be laughing about that exchange years later. The first board. She was 9 the morning a real surfboard was finally placed beneath her feet, chosen mostly for stability, a longboard, the kind beginners learn on because the additional volume is forgiving of the constant errors that define early surfing. The conditions that morning were manageable. Small rolling waves near shore, cloudy sky, weak offshore wind, the kind of morning that looks slightly gray and ordinary and is in fact ideal for learning things. She wiped out almost immediately. Not a dramatic wipeout involving height or violence, just the quiet, instant failure of a body not yet calibrated for the task. The board slid sideways. She disappeared beneath whitewater. When she surfaced, hair covering her face, she looked shocked for a moment that lasted about half a second. Then she started laughing. Again, she said. Bamba pulled the board back toward her. You sure? Yes. You just got destroyed. I know. You want to cry first or later? Shut up. She paddled back out. By the end of that morning, she had managed to stand for less than 2 seconds before falling again. That tiny moment, the 2 seconds of standing, the feel of moving water beneath a board that was actually moving with her, changed something. Not immediately in some cinematic way. There was no dramatic declaration, no prophecy. No one standing on the beach announcing greatness. There was simply a little girl who suddenly wanted to spend every possible hour near the water, and a family that understood, at some level below rational decision-making, that this was not a passing phase. The rules of the house. Her mother enforced structure: homework before surfing, school before surfing, responsibilities before surfing. Katie accepted these rules not because she agreed with the hierarchy they imposed, but because obeying them was the fastest path back to the ocean. She was competitive long before she was polished. That competitiveness appeared in strange ways at first. She raced boys older than herself paddling back outside after waves, not because she could beat them, she usually couldn't, but because she refused to accept the idea that she shouldn't try. Once, after finishing poorly in a youth contest near El Sunzal, she refused to speak during the entire drive home. Bamba finally looked over from the driver's seat. You know you surf worse when you're angry? I wasn't angry. You're literally crying. I'm sweating. It's nighttime. Katie stared out the window stubbornly while everyone else in the car laughed. She was 10 years old. She was already the most serious person in the vehicle about the results. Money and equipment money was always a factor, and anyone who tells the story of early Salvadoran surf culture without acknowledging that is telling a cleaned-up version designed for tourism brochures. Boards were expensive, genuinely significantly expensive, relative to ordinary Salvadoran wages. A decent shortboard could cost more than some families made in 2 months. Fins disappeared and couldn't easily be replaced. Entry fees for regional contests accumulated. Travel to competitions in Nicaragua or Guatemala or Costa Rica involved transportation, lodging, meals, and fuel costs that required real planning and sacrifice. Katie learned early to care for her equipment with the specific attentiveness of someone who knows that what they're holding cannot be quickly replaced. She patched dings carefully, carried boards across rocks at angles that minimized contact, reused wax past the point where most surfers would have discarded it, kept contest jerseys folded and protected because losing one would be a problem. When international surfers passing through La Libertad gave away used gear, which happened occasionally, because the surf world has its own informal economies of generosity, those moments mattered enormously to local kids. One Australian surfer handed Katie an old traction pad after noticing the worn condition of her board, crouching down to her level first. "You surf every day?" "Yes." "You skip school for waves?" "My mother would kill me." The man laughed. "Good answer." He meant it as a compliment. She meant it as a factual statement. The rock there was a story Bamba told her more than once, and unlike the business about the ocean's moods, he did not make this one up. It was about the rock, the dark mass of stone that stands off the beach near Sunzal, the one the tourists photograph at sunset, and the locals have mostly stopped seeing. Katie had noticed, because she noticed everything, that the experienced surfers gave it a wide berth, leaning the same way as they paddled around it. She wanted to know why. The water looked fine there. It had to do with a man. It had happened a few years earlier when she was barely into her teens, recent enough that the older surfers still spoke of it, still measured other swells against it. The man was a foreigner, an American, an orthopedic surgeon from California who had come to love this coast the way some visitors did and had decided to make a second life out of it. He had bought land along the shore. He meant to build cisterns and teach the families nearby to catch and store the rainy season so the children would have something clean to drink through the dry months. Adrian had known him a little. The man had come around asking about land, about water, about how things worked here. He was fit, a runner of long races back home, strong through the shoulders, and he surfed the way men like that often surf. Well enough, gladly, and only ever on waves that had never once tried to kill him. His own country's waves were not these waves. That was the whole of it, in the end, though it took the sea only a few minutes to make the point. The swell came up overnight without any of the warnings the locals knew to read. By first light, it was the biggest in years, the sets stacked to the horizon, and men who had surfed the points, their entire lives stood on the sand with their boards under their arms and did not go out. The man went out. The current took him almost at once and ran him down toward the rock, and somewhere in there his leash snapped and his board went away from him into the white. After that, he was only a swimmer, and the sea had already chosen the rock for him. He reached it. That was the thing that undid him. He got his hands on the stone and held, because the stone was the one solid thing in a world that had turned entirely to moving water, and holding it felt like the opposite of drowning. From the shore, they shouted at him to stop. "Sueltate," they yelled, waving their arms. "Let go." The current that pinned him to the rock would carry him to the beach if he stopped fighting it. The only way in was to surrender to the very thing that frightened him. But he could not make his hands open, and who could blame him? Every animal that has ever clung to a rock in a storm has believed the rock was saving its life. A set came. The sea gave him back days later, some miles down the coast, where the current had finally tired of carrying him. Katie did not say anything for a while. She looked at the rock and did the arithmetic that children do. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Would I have known to let go? Bamba thought about how to answer her. The honest answer was that nobody knows until the water asks them, and that the men who survived these points are not braver than the man who drowned, only luckier in what they were taught before their turn came. But that was not what a girl needed to carry down to the shore with her. So he told her the other thing, which was also true, that the ocean had no opinion of her. It was not cruel and it was not kind. It was only ever what it happened to be on the day you met it, and the whole of what he was teaching her, underneath the standing up and the falling off, was how to read which day it was. Learn its moods the way you learn a person's, and when it takes you somewhere you did not mean to go, do not spend your strength on the part of it that cannot be fought. Sometimes the way out is to stop holding on. You'll know, he said. By the time the water asks, you'll know. By her early teenage years, people around La Libertad were beginning to notice something unusual. Not simply that she was talented, because plenty of young surfers showed flashes of talent that didn't develop into anything sustained, but that she seemed constitutionally incapable of accepting limitations as final. Once she committed to a wave, hesitation disappeared from her surfing almost entirely. She attacked sections that other surfers pulled away from. "She goes," one local surfer said quietly, after watching her take off deep at Punta Roca during heavier conditions. It became her reputation early. Passed through the small, interconnected world of the Salvadoran surf scene, the way reputations move in small communities, through observation, through simple language, through people who watch carefully and say little. She goes, the ocean often rewards that quality, until it doesn't.